Today's January 15th, 2021, and that means that Donald Trump only has 5 days left of being President of the United States because in 5 days from now, on January 20th, 2021, that is when Joe Biden will officially be inaugurated as the 46th President of the United States. Now, I'm not really here to talk about that in today's video. I'm here to talk about another election that will be taking place later this year. More specifically, I would like to talk about a candidate that's running in that election. So, you can tell by the title and the picture on screen, I'm talking about Andrew Yang. Just 2 days ago, Andrew Yang formally announced that he will be running for mayor of New York City in the 2021 mayoral election in New York City. So, the reason why I think he chose January 13th as the date to announce his candidacy was because January 13th is actually his birthday. 2 days ago, on January 13th, 2021, Andrew Yang turned 46 years old. That is also the day when he made the formal announcement that he was actually running for mayor. Now, I actually made two other videos before today talking about the New York City mayoral election that's taking place later this year. In one of the videos, I talked about Andrew Yang specifically, but in the other video, I've talked about some of the other candidates that are also running in this election, but I'm just making this video today to give an update on the race because now Andrew Yang is actually running. Last time I talked about this topic, Andrew Yang had filed the paperwork, but he hadn't officially announced his plans to run yet. But at this point in time, we now know for a fact that he is actually running for mayor of New York City, and that'll be pretty interesting to see how that goes because the election is still many, many months away, so all the candidates, including Andrew Yang, they still have plenty of time to make a case for themselves, campaign. The primaries for both the Democrats and the Republicans, the primary is taking place in June. I believe the date is June 22nd. That's when the Democratic primaries and Republican primaries are taking place for this election. So that's a little more than 5 months away from today. So even for just the primaries, each candidate has a little over 5 months to campaign. But the actual general election, the main New York City mayoral election, that's not taking place until November of 2021. So just under 10 months from now, that's when the main New York City mayoral election will be taking place. Now, just like the presidential elections, these take place every 4 years, but unlike the presidential elections, the year they take place on are not multiples of four. The mayoral elections in New York City actually take place exactly a year after the presidential elections normally do. I guess not exactly a year, technically, but like right around a year after the presidential elections. That's when New York City usually has its mayoral elections. Like the 2020 presidential election was in November 2020, and New York City will have its election for mayor in November 2021. Likewise, the 2016 presidential election was in November 2016. New York City had an election for mayor in November 2017, and then it was also there in 2013, 2009, 2005, 2001, so on and so forth. You get the idea. So, after this election, the next election for New York City mayor is in 2025, which is 4 years from this year, 2021. So, it is as often, these mayoral elections happen as often as the presidential elections, which means not that often. So, I think that this is a political race definitely worth paying attention to. It's probably going to be one of the more talked about political races that will be taking place this year, to the extent that there are actually elections taking place this year. Since 2021 is an odd numbered year, there aren't really many major elections taking place. Usually, the House elections happen on even numbered years, and the presidential elections happen on years that are multiples of four. And then the Senate races, each specific Senate seat is up for re-election every 6 years, but every 2 years there are a third of the seats up for re-election. So during every even numbered year, there are around 33 Senate seats that are up for re-election or up for election, but in odd numbered years there aren't really many major elections worth paying attention to. But I think this is one of the elections taking place this year that you should definitely keep your eyes on, especially since Andrew Yang is a pretty notable candidate. Probably out of all the candidates running in this race, probably one of the candidates with the most name recognition, which is pretty ironic considering that in the 2020 Democratic primaries, he was one of the candidates with the least name recognition. Nobody knew who he was before he ran for president, but I think he had a pretty successful presidential run in my opinion, even though he didn't actually get far in the actual primaries. He got lots of name recognition. A lot of people who previously did not know who he was now know who he is, and I think that he's in a pretty good position to not only to just run a decent campaign in this election like he did in the presidential election cycle in the Democratic primaries that took place last year, but I think that he's also in a pretty good position to actually win this race, win this election. The thing about New York City is that it is a major city, and like most major cities, it leans heavily towards the Democrats. There are a lot more Democrats in NYC than there are Republicans, meaning that whoever wins the Democratic primaries on June 22nd or whatever date it is, I know for a fact it's in June, I don't remember the exact date, but whoever wins the Democratic primaries in June for that election is almost guaranteed to win the general election in November. So, really, the thing that's worth paying attention to more than anything else is the Democratic primaries that will take place in June 2021 for this election. But I still think that Andrew Yang's in a pretty good position to win the primaries, the Democratic primaries for the NYC mayoral election, 2021 election. And I think that if he wins the primaries, then he'll easily win the general election since New York City leans heavily towards the Democrats to begin with, but he also got a lot of name recognition from the primaries that took place last year.